Smooth backgrounds and amazing low light performance are two features we've come to expect from basically every 2.8 300mm lens. But with their latest release, Canon has gone against the grain and created an f2.8 100 to 300mm zoom lens. On paper, the added flexibility sounds incredible, and if we add the 2x extender, we can also create the fastest 200 to 600mm lens on the market. These are the kind of specs that should get every wildlife photographer excited, yet there are also some serious downsides, like the added size and weight and the steep price tag. And the big question is, how does it actually perform with the teleconverters? So let's take a look and see how this lens performs in the wild. I'm Jan Wegener, and for over 20 years I've dedicated myself to capturing unique bird photos and videos and helping others just like you to create your own masterpieces. When this lens was first announced, I didn't think it was one that was too interesting for me, mainly because 300mm is a bit too short for what I do. But over the last few weeks and months, I had the chance to use this lens extensively in the field alongside with the R1, and I must admit it has quite surprised me on many different levels. When you grab the lens for the first time, you'll notice that it's actually a little bit larger and heavier than you expect, coming in at 5.7 pounds or 2.59 kilograms. That aside, the lens is still very hand-holdable and sits very nicely and balanced in your hand, so even longer periods of time of hand-holding I didn't find too tiring. Unlike many other Canon lenses, this lens is an internal zoom design, which means there's no parts protruding in or out when you're zooming. It also allows you to really quickly zoom from the 100 to the 300mm. And of course, like all L lenses, this lens also comes with an actually quite short lens hood. Normally I don't start lens reviews by talking about the image stabilization, but with this lens I have to, because it's the one thing that surprised me the most about this lens. When I picked it up for the first time, I just couldn't believe how stable it is, and I could easily do handheld video at 300mm or even 420 or 600mm with the teleconverters, and the viewfinder would hardly move. And the same is true when you're doing photography. The viewfinder basically doesn't move, and it's very easy to track birds in flight or do low light shooting. I could even do pretty much shake-free handheld video of birds in flight, which I found pretty incredible. The combination of the R1 and 100 to 300mm lens definitely gave me one of those wow moments in the field, because the image stabilization was just that good and probably the best of any Canon combo I've ever used. But even on other cameras like the R5, the R3 or the R5 Mark II, the image stabilization was still very good and amongst Canon's best. On one of my first shoots with this lens, I took it to the local rainforest looking for sulfur-crested cockatoos and crimson rosellas. And like all forests, light is always hard to come by in the rainforest, so having that f2.9 aperture really helped me in getting enough shutter speeds, because I could open up the aperture and let enough light into my sensor that then allowed me to have nice and bright images even in these dark and challenging conditions, and I didn't have to use crazy high ISOs, which was fantastic. Another great feature of the lens is the relatively small focusing distance of 1.8 meters or 5.9 feet. Now, this doesn't really allow you to do macro work with this lens, but for most other subjects, if you're shooting sports or wildlife or even smaller birds, this is definitely enough, and I didn't really have an issue with it in the field at all. What I really enjoyed about this lens is the ability to frame your subject a little bit wider and at the same time still get nice and smooth backgrounds, something that's quite difficult to achieve with many other zoom lenses. Another standout feature of this lens is the autofocus. It's super fast and accurate, and tracks the birds reliably even in video mode. I mainly use the lens on the R1 and the R5 Mark II, but I would expect it to perform in a similar way on most other Canon camera bodies as well. With this lens and the R1 in particular, I never felt like I was in a situation where the autofocus would let me down. One day I had planned to visit this tern colony where you get beautiful low sunlight in the afternoon, but as we know, plans don't always work out in nature photography and thick clouds rolled in. But I thought, now that I'm here already, I may as well test out this lens and camera, and the performance was truly amazing. Even in these low light situations, I was still able to reliably lock onto the birds with the 300mm lens and the 1.4 extender. And what I liked about the zoom lens in particular is that it allowed me to zoom out a little bit, find the bird in my viewfinder, and then quickly zoom in all the way to frame the bird nicely in my images. What possibly surprised me the most was how good the autofocus also performed in video mode. I didn't only take flight shots of the bird, but also slow motion videos of the birds coming in, and the R1 with the 100 to 300mm lens very reliably tracked the subjects and gave me some beautiful flight footage of the birds just landing in low light conditions, which I found very impressive. So overall, whether it was in the dark rainforest, photographing subjects very small in your frame, or birds in flight in photo or video mode, the autofocus on this lens performed very well in all situations. If you're hand-holding this lens for an extended period of time, especially with a heavy camera like the R1, it can start to feel heavy after time, but I found that the great autofocus and image stabilization definitely helped me out, even once my arms got a little bit weaker, because this viewfinder was just so rock solid, which helped you to still frame your subjects really nicely. And no matter what camera or lens you're using, the best way to actually improve your final results is to learn better image editing techniques. And I would love to help you to do exactly that with my Lightroom and Photoshop Masterclasses. In these classes, I teach you everything you need to know in Photoshop and Lightroom step by step and in easy to follow chapters, so you can easily turn your own RAW files into stunning masterpieces. But you won't just be watching. I'm also providing you with my own RAW file so you can edit right alongside me. And if you're not sure whether my masterclasses are worth it or the right fit for you, check out some of the amazing reviews I've already received from many happy customers that I've helped to transform their own editing lives, and now they're also able to get stunning results from their own RAW images. So if you want to turn editing from a frustrating chore that you actually kind of want to skip or avoid into a rewarding experience because now you finally know how to do it and how to make your own files look amazing, then I would recommend that you check out my Lightroom and Next Generation Photoshop Masterclass down there in the description. I know that will help you a lot. When it comes to the image quality of this lens, there's actually not that much to say. It's nice and sharp at 100mm even wide open, and it's nice and sharp at 300mm even wide open. So the image quality of the bare lens basically in all situations is fantastic. As we all know, 300mm isn't a lot of focal length when it comes to photographing birds or smaller wildlife. So one of the most interesting questions for me was actually to find out how this lens performs with teleconverters. Because if this lens performs well with teleconverters, it could also be an amazing travel lens. We could have a 100 to 300, a 140 to 420, and a 200 to 600mm lens, all in the one small package when we use this lens and the teleconverters. And the best thing would be that the lens would be wide open at f4 with the 1.4 extender and f5.6 with the 2x extender. So at least on paper, this would make the lens even more versatile and a very compelling option for many wildlife photographers. Whenever I put the 1.4 teleconverter onto the 100 to 300mm lens, the results were still very good. It was a little bit less sharp wide open at f4 than it was without the teleconverter, but if I stopped down slightly, sharpness returned and the overall performance was still exceptional with great image stabilization, great autofocus, and also good image quality. However, when you use the lens with the 2x teleconverter, things start to fall apart a little bit, and this is where I was the most disappointed in the lens. I was really hoping this lens would work well with both teleconverters, because then it would have given me amazing flexibility in the field, basically having a 100 to 600mm zoom range with attractive f-stops. But whenever you put the 2x teleconverter on the 100 to 300mm lens, the resulting images wide open are actually quite soft. And only stopping down to at least f8, which is 1 stop, or f11, which is 2 stop, brings all the sharpness back into the files. Now for video work, shooting wide open at f4 with the 1.4 extender or f5.6 with the 2x extender wasn't as much of a problem and the files still look good, but this was actually quite surprising to me. This is not really a problem if you're shooting in lighter conditions because stopping down to f8 is still possible, but in darker conditions this is definitely an issue if you have to stop down all the way to f8. And one of the main reasons you buy a lens like this is actually having these fast f-stops available. So then having the need to stop down 1 stop kind of negates some of the purpose or some of the reasons you're actually buying this lens. So overall, the performance with the teleconverters was decent, but it's not something that I would want to rely on an everyday basis, especially if I'm planning to shoot wide open at f4 or f5.6 most of the time. An interesting comparison to Canon's lens is actually Sony's kind of new 2.8 300mm lens. And unlike Canon, who decided to go with a slightly heavier lens that has the added flexibility, Sony decided to go as small as possible and created a very small and lightweight 2.8 300mm prime lens that comes in at just 3.24 pounds or 1.47 kilograms. And that lens actually works very well in the field with both teleconverters and is also sharp wide open. However, on Sony's lens, while the autofocus is very nice and sharp even with the teleconverters, the image stabilization is probably its biggest downside because that is somewhat shaky even with the newer camera models, whereas that is one of the true standout features on the Canon lens. So I'm not really saying one is better than the other, and depending on your use case you probably like one or the other better, but it's definitely interesting to see how two companies take basically the same lens concept and then take it in completely different directions. Overall, it seems Canon's zoom design created an amazing lens with great flexibility, but the trade-off was a bit of extra size, extra price tag, and also the loss of image quality when using with the teleconverters. Where this lens is basically a no-brainer is for everyone who uses a 2.8 300mm prime lens and a 70-200 f2.8 lens, because this lens essentially would allow you to combine two of these lenses and potentially two camera bodies that you're using with the two lenses in the one body and the one lens. So in that case, you would not only save money, but it would also give you so much more flexibility in the field, because instead of fumbling with two cameras and two lenses, you can just have the one camera and the one lens. So all in all, this is a lens that I really enjoyed using in the field, especially for video work as well, because that amazing image stabilization even allowed me to do handheld video with ease. But at the same time, I've not gotten myself to buy one just yet, because with the high price tag and the loss of image quality with the teleconverters, I feel like I just wouldn't use it enough at the moment. But I could definitely see myself hiring this lens for a trip where I know that I'm dealing with slightly larger or a lot of tame subjects, or on a trip where I simply can't pack a big 600mm prime lens. What are your thoughts on this lens? Do you own one? Have you used one? Is it on your wish list? And what did you think about the performance with the teleconverters? Let me know in the comments. Also give me a thumbs up for the video, check out my channel membership and my masterclasses, and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in another video very soon. Bye!